What do we do with brokenness? Like, what do we do with the broken situations in our lives? What do we do with the broken people in our lives? What do we do with the broken societies in our world? I'll be honest, it's not just this morning, but over the last weeks and months, brokenness, especially when it comes to our world and society, has been on my mind and heart a lot. Because things just seem so broken. Just such a mess. And in times of brokenness, the number one threat to moving from today to tomorrow is the loss of hope, is the loss of belief that there is a plan in this messed up turmoil, in this crazy toil. What do we do with brokenness? Do we dismiss it? Do we try to explain it away? Do we try to Christianize it so that it actually, instead of brokenness, can seem like it's just a part of this big cosmic plan that God is unfolding? What do we do with brokenness? One of the things I find interesting when I go throughout the New Testament, well, honestly, whenever I go throughout the entire Bible, is that the one thing that the Bible never seems to affirm is to act as if brokenness doesn't exist. Is to act as if what is broken is actually, put together. Or to dismiss it away. No, the Bible consistently encourages us, demonstrates to us, and compels us to stare brokenness in the face. Because if you look deeply into brokenness, you just might see the power of God beginning to emerge. The text that I'm wrestling with today comes from the book of 1 Corinthians. The book of 1 Corinthians is Paul writing to this church in Corinth and talk about broken. The church of Corinth is an absolute mess. I mean, they have disunity problems on a whole nother level. They have disruptive behaviors on a whole nother level. And Paul begins the remedy in speaking to this broken church by staring in the face of brokenness, but for a greater purpose. So in verse 18, Paul begins to talk about the message of the cross. He talks about in verse 18 how the message of the cross is foolishness to those that are perishing. But to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. He's flipping the understanding of what victory actually is, of what power actually looks like, of what brokenness can actually become. As a matter of fact, the emphasis on the cross in the first and second chapters of 1 Corinthians sets the stage for how he is going to address the brokenness of the Corinthian church for the rest of the book. But I find this fascinating. A couple of different times, Paul says this, like verse 23. We preach Christ crucified. Now, truthfully, if I was being honest about what I typically preach is Christ resurrected. Like whenever I'm looking towards the Gospels, whenever I'm looking towards Paul's letters, if I'm even reading the book of Revelation, it's Christ resurrected that draws my attention. And that may have something to do with my story of desiring for my wounds to be made whole. But one of the things that Paul's preaching pattern cautions me against is overlooking the brokenness of the cross so that I can just get to the remedy and the resurrection. There is something about preaching Christ crucified, looking and intently and focusing keenly on the brokenness of Jesus that sets us up, that sets me up as a disciple of Christ, to be able to deal with the brokenness in the society, in the communities, and in the country around me. As a matter of fact, Paul takes it to a whole new level in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2. Listen to what he says. He's talking about whenever he was with the Corinthian church, and he says, "For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." You see, for Paul, the crucifixion is not just an added detail. It's not even just the climactic moment of the gospel narratives. For Paul, the cross is the clarifying agent. It is the key lens through which he is able to look at the lives and the world and the church around him, and to be able to see this truth very clearly. That because of Christ, we have received the revelation that God brings beauty from the broken. Notice what I said there. He brings beauty from the broken. Not victory in the sense of the way in which we understand victory, because whenever you're at the foot of the cross and you're looking at the mangled king, it does not look like there is any sort of victory on the horizon. But there is something about the seed that is being planted with Christ on that tree that over time and through great toil, blossoms begin to burgeon, where beauty begins to emerge from brokenness. In my own life and in my own heart, I have felt the Spirit compelling me to not look past the brokenness of my situations, but to press deeply, ever more deeply into them. Why? Because like the seed that doesn't just sit on the surface of the soil, but the seed that is pushed beneath the earth, whenever that seed gets into this safe but dark and broken place, the seed itself begins to crack open. And it is in this breaking that beauty begins to pierce the very soil that brought it darkness as it finds its way towards the sun and God's light. Here's my challenge for you this week. Don't hide. Don't dismiss the brokenness around you. Instead, press ever more deeply into it so that the beauty of God begin to emerge in the same way that he brought beauty to all of us through his brokenness on the cross. I love you guys. Have a good week.